For years, most of us believed that a few houseplants could quietly clean the air we breathe at home, and that belief came from NASA itself. But the real story behind that research is something far more nuanced and far more interesting than anything you may have heard. Stay with us, because what plants are actually doing to your body and your mind goes much deeper than air quality charts will ever show. They told you plants could clean the air in your home, and you believed it, because it came from NASA. But what if the real story is far more powerful than anything a scientific study ever measured? Today, we are going to talk about something most plant videos will never say out loud. Not because it is a secret, but because it requires slowing down enough to actually see it. You may have spent years filling your home with greenery, hoping for fresher air, a healthier body, a quieter mind. And maybe you have wondered, quietly, whether it was working, whether any of it was making a difference, or whether you were simply holding on to something that felt alive in a season of your life when other things were quietly slipping away. That is not a small thing to carry. This video will not promise you miracles. It will not hand you a list of 10 plants and tell you your lungs will thank you. What it will do is something rarer. It will tell you the truth about what plants actually do, what the science honestly says, and what no headline ever had the patience to explain. Because the story NASA started is not the story that matters most. The story that matters is the one happening quietly in your living room, in the corner by the window, in the pot you remember to water on Sunday mornings. That story has nothing to do with air filters or toxin removal charts. It has everything to do with something older, something the body knows before the mind catches up. So before you skip ahead, before you decide you already know this, ask yourself one question. When was the last time something living made you feel less alone? They told you plants could clean the air in your home, and you believed it because it came from NASA. But what if the real story is far more powerful than anything a scientific study ever measured? Today, we are going to talk about something most plant videos will never say out loud. Not because it is a secret, but because it requires slowing down enough to actually see it. You may have spent years filling your home with greenery, hoping for fresher air, a healthier body, a quieter mind. And maybe you have wondered, quietly, whether it was working, whether any of it was making a difference, or whether you were simply holding on to something that felt alive in a season of your life when other things were quietly slipping away. That is not a small thing to carry. This video will not promise you miracles. It will not hand you a list of 10 plants and tell you your lungs will thank you. What it will do is something rarer. It will tell you the truth about what plants actually do, what the science honestly says, and what no headline ever had the patience to explain. Because the story NASA started is not the story that matters most. The story that matters is the one happening quietly in your living room, in the corner by the window, in the pot you remember to water on Sunday mornings. That story has nothing to do with air filters or toxin removal charts. It has everything to do with something older, something the body knows before the mind catches up. So before you skip ahead, before you decide you already know this, ask yourself one question. When was the last time something living made you feel less alone? Let's take a moment to go back to 1989, when NASA published a study that would quietly change the way millions of people thought about the plants in their homes. The study was real. The scientists were serious, and the findings were genuinely interesting. NASA researchers, along with the Associated Landscape Contractors of America, wanted to understand whether certain common houseplants could remove toxic chemical compounds from the air inside a sealed chamber. The chemicals they tested for included things like benzene, formaldehyde, and trichloroethylene. These are compounds found in paints, cleaning products, and building materials. And yes, the plants did absorb measurable amounts of those chemicals in the lab. That part is true. And it was a meaningful piece of research. But here is what happened next. The internet got hold of it. By the time that study had traveled through 1,000 blog posts and social media shares, the message had been simplified into something like this. Put a few houseplants in your home, and they will clean your air. Keep one on your desk, one in the bedroom, a few in the living room, and your family will breathe easier. It sounded wonderful, and honestly, it was not entirely wrong, but it was missing most of the story. You see, the conditions inside a NASA research chamber and the conditions inside your home are almost nothing alike. The chamber was sealed, with no ventilation, no open windows, no foot traffic, no doors swinging open and closed throughout the day. The concentration of plants, relative to the volume of air, was dramatically higher than anything most of us would ever have in a real living space. And the rate at which those plants processed the chemicals was measured over a carefully controlled period of time. In your actual home, air moves, it circulates, windows open, heating and cooling systems run, people come and go. The air exchange rate in a typical American house is many times higher than it was inside that sealed chamber. And what that means, practically speaking, is that to achieve the same air purifying effect that NASA observed in the lab, you would need somewhere between 10 and 1,000 plants per square meter of floor space. That is not a typo. A 2019 study published in the Journal of Exposure Science and Environmental Epidemiology crunched the numbers carefully, and that is what the math produced. In a real home with real ventilation, the air cleaning effect of a modest number of houseplants is genuinely very small. Not zero, but very small. Now, before you feel disappointed, I want you to pause right here, because this is the part where most videos would stop. They would say, well, the science does not support the popular claim, and that would be the end of it. A myth debunked. Story over. Click away. But that would be the most incomplete version of this story I could possibly tell you. Because what the science actually reveals, when you look at all of it, when you look beyond the air quality studies and into the broader research on plants and human well-being, is something that is not smaller than what NASA suggested. It is considerably larger. Let's talk about something called biophilia. The word itself comes from the Greek, bio, meaning life, philia, meaning love or affinity. Edward O. Wilson, one of the most respected biologists of the 20th century, introduced the concept in 1984 with the argument that human beings have an innate, deeply rooted connection to other living things. That we are, quite literally, wired to respond to nature, not as a preference, not as a personality trait, but as a biological inheritance. Think about that for a moment. You and I both know, from our own experience, that there is something different about sitting in a room with a few green plants compared to sitting in a room that is entirely bare. Something shifts. The air does not feel different in any measurable chemical sense, but something does feel different. And for a long time, people assumed that was just aesthetics, personal taste, nothing more. But the research tells a more interesting story. Studies going back decades have found that the mere presence of plants, or even images of natural settings, can produce measurable changes in the human nervous system. Heart rate slows, blood pressure decreases, cortisol levels, which are a marker of stress, begin to drop. These are not subtle or subjective effects. They show up on instruments. They are repeatable, and they occur quickly, sometimes within minutes of exposure to a natural environment or even a natural image. What this suggests is that somewhere in the long history of our species, the presence of green growing things became associated in the deepest layers of our nervous system with safety, with sustenance, with the kind of environment where human beings could rest and recover rather than stay on alert. Your body, in other words, may recognize a houseplant in a way your conscious mind does not fully understand. And that recognition matters. Many of us reach a point in life, somewhere in our 50s or 60s, or beyond, where the pace of daily existence begins to feel heavier in a different way than it did before. It is not always the big things. It is often the accumulation of smaller ones. The quiet tiredness that does not fully lift after a night of sleep. The sense that the world outside moves faster and louder than it used to. The moments in a day when you find yourself standing in the kitchen or sitting in a chair by a window, just needing a few minutes of stillness. If any of that sounds familiar, you are not alone, not remotely. And this is precisely the space where plants, when we understand them correctly, begin to matter in ways that go far beyond air chemistry. Research on what scientists call attention restoration theory suggests that natural environments, including small ones, including indoor ones, provide the mind with something it desperately needs. They provide what the theory calls effortless attention, the kind of gentle, soft focus that requires no mental effort, no concentration, no decision-making. You look at a plant, the shape of the leaves, the small variations in color, the slight movement of a frond in a draft from the window, and your mind, without being asked to do anything, simply rests. This is not a small thing. In a world that constantly demands our directed attention, our focused thinking, our rapid responses, the ability to genuinely rest the mind is becoming rarer. And the cost of not resting it, over time, shows up in ways most of us recognize. Mental fatigue, reduced patience, a diminished capacity to find joy in the things we used to enjoy. A plant on a windowsill will not fix all of that, but it can be part of something that does. Let's take a moment to consider what the research says specifically about stress. There is a field of study called environmental psychology, and researchers in this field have spent considerable time looking at how our immediate surroundings affect our emotional and physiological state. One of the consistent findings across dozens of studies is that natural elements in an indoor space, plants, natural light, wood textures, water features, tend to reduce self-reported stress and anxiety, and to improve mood in ways that are statistically meaningful. A study conducted in the Netherlands looked at hospital patients recovering from surgery. Some rooms contained plants, others did not. The patients in rooms with plants requested less pain medication. They had lower blood pressure and heart rate. They reported feeling less anxious and more positive about their recovery, and they were discharged, on average, sooner than patients in rooms without plants. Now, hospitals are not homes, and a recovery room is not a living room. But the underlying principle is the same. The presence of something living, something green and quietly growing, changes the emotional quality of a space. It changes how safe we feel in it. And how safe we feel in our home has a significant effect on how our bodies function. This is worth sitting with for a moment. We spend a great deal of time thinking about what we eat, what we drink, how much we sleep, how much we exercise. And all of those things matter enormously. But the emotional atmosphere of the space we live in, the daily, continuous background feeling of our home, also shapes our health in ways that are slow and cumulative and very real. A home that feels calming is not just a preference, it is a form of care. There is something else the research touches on that I find particularly meaningful for those of us who have passed the midpoint of life. It is the question of purpose. There is a body of research, much of it coming out of Japan and Scandinavia, that looks at the relationship between a sense of purpose and longevity. The Japanese have a concept called ikigai, which translates roughly as a reason for being. A reason to get up in the morning, something that gives the day structure and meaning. And the research consistently shows that people who have a clear sense of ikigai, who feel that their daily existence is purposeful and connected to something they care about, live longer, healthier lives. Now, I am not suggesting that a potted plant will give you your reason for living. That would be an overstatement, and you deserve better than overstatements. But I am saying this: caring for something, however small, is a form of purpose. It is a daily ritual of attention and responsibility. When you water a plant, when you check whether it needs more light or less, when you notice a new leaf unfurling, you are engaged in an act of stewardship. You are keeping something alive. And in doing so, you are also, quietly, keeping something alive in yourself. Many of us, as the years go by, find that the circle of things requiring our direct care has become smaller. Children have grown and moved away. Careers have wound down. The daily structure that once kept us tethered to the world has loosened. And in that loosening, there is sometimes a kind of drift. A subtle sense that the days have become less anchored. A plant will not replace what has changed, but it can be one small thread in a new kind of daily fabric. Something to return to. Something that responds to your attention. Something that grows. Let us talk now about sleep, because it is one of the areas where people most often wonder about plants, and where the information tends to be both incomplete and occasionally misleading. You may have heard that certain plants release oxygen at night rather than during the day. The snake plant, in particular, is frequently mentioned in this context, and it is true that the snake plant, along with a few others such as aloe vera and some orchids, are what botanists call cam plants, meaning they perform a different kind of photosynthesis that involves absorbing carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen during the nighttime hours. This sounds promising, and it is not false, but here is the honest context. The amount of oxygen that a single snake plant releases in a bedroom over the course of a night is genuinely very small. Not harmful in any way, but not enough to meaningfully change the oxygen content of the air you breathe while you sleep. A plant is not an oxygen machine. The effect is real, but it is subtle. So does this mean having a plant in your bedroom is pointless? Not at all. The benefit of a bedroom plant is not primarily chemical. It is atmospheric. It is the quality of the space itself. A room that contains a living plant tends to feel different than one that does not. There is a quality of aliveness that is hard to articulate, but that most people recognize immediately when they walk into such a space. There is also the role that nighttime rituals play in sleep quality. Many sleep researchers emphasize the importance of what are called pre-sleep cues, small, consistent behaviors that signal to the body and mind that it is time to begin the transition toward rest. For some people, tending to a plant in the evening, checking the soil, adjusting the placement, noticing how it is doing, becomes part of that ritual. It is quiet, it is gentle, it asks nothing demanding of the mind. And that quality of gentle, low-demand attention can be a useful bridge between the activity of the day and the stillness of the night. It is interesting to reflect on how our relationship with plants has changed over the course of human history. For most of our existence as a species, we did not choose to be around plants. We simply were. We lived in and among them. Our food came from them. Our shelter was built from them. The rhythms of the natural world, the changing of seasons, the flowering and dying back and flowering again, structured our sense of time. Plants were not decor. They were the context of human life. And then, over the last few centuries, and accelerating dramatically in the last 100 years, most of us moved away from that. We moved into cities and suburbs. We moved indoors. The natural world became something we visited on weekends rather than something we inhabited every moment. And our homes, beautiful and comfortable as many of them are, became largely sealed off from the living systems that shaped us over hundreds of thousands of years. This shift happened so gradually that we barely noticed it, and yet the research suggests that our nervous systems did notice. That the absence of natural elements from our daily environment has costs that we are only beginning to understand and measure. The movement of people toward houseplants, toward indoor gardens, toward bringing green living things back into the spaces where we spend most of our time, is not merely a trend or an aesthetic choice. It is, I think, something older than that, something closer to a return. Let's take a moment to talk practically, because this is the part of the conversation where we move from ideas to action. If you are thinking about adding plants to your home, or if you already have some and want to think more clearly about their role, there are a few things worth knowing. The first is this: simplicity is your friend. One of the most common mistakes people make with houseplants is overcomplicating things. They choose plants with demanding care requirements, or they place them in spots where the light is wrong, or they overwater because they are anxious about underwatering. And then the plant struggles. And instead of a quiet, calming presence in the home, it becomes a source of low-grade guilt, which is precisely the opposite of what we are looking for. The goal is not a plant collection. The goal is a living presence in your space that brings ease rather than obligation. With that in mind, there are a handful of plants that have earned their reputation for resilience and ease of care, and that also happen to be genuinely beautiful in a quiet, unassuming way. The pothos is one of the most forgiving plants you will ever encounter. It tolerates low light, inconsistent watering, and the kind of benign neglect that a busy or occasionally forgetful person might offer. Its trailing green vines have a softness that works well on a shelf or the edge of a bookcase, and it grows visibly and steadily, which gives it a sense of aliveness that is easy to notice and enjoy. The snake plant, which we mentioned earlier, is another excellent choice. It is architectural in its presence, with upright leaves that give a room a sense of quiet structure. It is extremely drought tolerant, which means if you forget to water it for 2 weeks, it will very likely forgive you. It does well in a range of light conditions, from bright indirect light to lower light corners. The rubber plant is a bit more of a statement. Its large, deep green leaves have a richness and a glossiness that feels both tropical and grounding. It appreciates bright, indirect light and moderate watering, and it grows into a genuinely impressive presence over time. For those who appreciate softness and air, the spider plant is a classic for good reason. It produces long, arching leaves and, as it matures, small offshoots that dangle on thin stems like little green satellites. It is nearly impossible to kill, tolerates a wide range of light conditions, and has been a beloved houseplant for generations precisely because it is so reliably cheerful. And if you want something that flowers, the peace lily deserves a place in the conversation. It is one of the few houseplants that will bloom in lower light conditions. Its white flowers have a quiet elegance, and its deep green foliage is lush and rich, even when it is not blooming. It is somewhat more sensitive to overwatering than the others mentioned, but with a little attention, it is not difficult to keep. There is a word I want to offer you as you think about this, and the word is ritual. We are creatures of ritual. Many of us, I think, do not fully recognize how much of our emotional well-being is sustained by small, regular acts that give structure and meaning to our days. Morning coffee at a particular time, a walk in the same direction each afternoon, a book before sleep. These rituals are not trivial. They are the architecture of a life that feels coherent and grounded. Caring for a plant can be one of those rituals. It does not require much. Watering, in most cases, once a week or less. A brief moment of attention, turning the pot slightly toward the light, wiping a leaf clean, noticing how the plant is doing. 5 minutes, perhaps less. But those 5 minutes, repeated across months and years, accumulate into something. They become a thread in the fabric of your daily life. A small act of stewardship that begins and ends each week in the same quiet way. There is something in that consistency that is deeply comforting, especially in a time of life when so much else is unpredictable, when health becomes less certain, when relationships change, when the world outside moves in ways that feel harder to follow or understand. The plant on your windowsill does not change in that way. It asks the same simple things of you each week, and in return, it grows. There is a line I find myself returning to when I think about this. Caring for something living, however small, quietly reminds us that growth never truly stops. I believe that is true. Not in a sentimental way, but in a very practical, biological, moment-to-moment way. The act of tending to a living thing, of keeping it fed and watered and turned toward the light, engages something ancient in us. Something that knows, in a way deeper than thought, that life is worth attending to. That it is worth the effort of showing up each week with a watering can. Let us take a moment to address something honestly, because I think it matters, and because you deserve a conversation that does not talk down to you. There are limits to what plants can do, and being clear about those limits is, I think, part of respecting your intelligence and your time. Plants will not cure illness. They will not remove enough toxins from your home to make a clinically significant difference in most circumstances. They are not a substitute for good ventilation, for reducing the use of chemical-heavy cleaning products, or for addressing genuine indoor air quality concerns with appropriate tools. If you live in a home with significant air quality issues, a handful of houseplants is not the solution. A proper air purifier, attention to ventilation, and where necessary, professional assessment are the appropriate responses. Similarly, plants will not solve loneliness. They will not replace human connection, meaningful relationships, or the kind of deep, reciprocal care that we need from other people. If you are feeling isolated or disconnected, the answer involves people. Plants can be a small, gentle supplement to well-being. They should not be asked to carry the full weight of it, and plants will not always thrive without effort. Some of them will get pests. Some will get too much water or too little light, and decline in ways that, if you are not paying attention, can happen faster than you expect. This is not a reason to avoid them. It is simply a reason to be realistic, and to choose plants that match your actual lifestyle, your actual schedule, and your actual relationship with the task of regular care. The goal, always, is ease. Choose plants that work with your life, not against it. I want to close this part of our conversation by returning to the NASA study for a moment. Not to dismiss it, but to honor what it actually was, rather than what it became. The scientists who conducted that research were asking a genuine and important question. They wanted to know whether plants could help create healthier indoor environments. They were working in the context of what was then called sick building syndrome, a recognized set of symptoms that appeared to affect people working in tightly sealed, poorly ventilated modern buildings. The research was real. The concern behind it was real. What happened afterward was not the fault of the researchers. It was the nature of information in a world that wants simple answers to complex questions. The study was simplified and amplified and repeated until the nuance fell away entirely, and what remained was a clean, reassuring message. Plants clean your air. That message was not a lie. It was an abbreviation, and like most abbreviations, it left out the parts that were most interesting. The most interesting part is not what plants do to the chemistry of your air. The most interesting part is what plants do to you. to your nervous system, to your stress hormones, to the quality of your attention and your sleep, and your daily emotional baseline, to your sense of purpose and continuity and belonging in the space you call home. None of that shows up in an air quality study, but it shows up in your life. And if you have ever lived in a home that felt genuinely welcoming and calm, or if you have ever noticed the difference between a room that feels bare and hard-edged and one that feels alive and soft, then you have already felt it. You just may not have had the words for it yet. Your home does not need to be perfect. It does not need to look like a magazine spread or a carefully curated Instagram feed. It does not need 100 plants or a dedicated plant room or a sophisticated watering system. It does not need to be optimized for anything. It needs only small touches of life, small touches of softness and presence. A snake plant in the corner of the bedroom that you water on Sunday evenings while the week winds down. A pothos on the kitchen shelf, trailing its way gently toward the window. A peace lily in the living room that surprises you every few months with a quiet white flower. These are not grand gestures. They do not require expertise or expense or a great deal of time. They require only the willingness to share your home with something living. And in return, they will do something that no air purifier will ever do, something that no supplement or self-help strategy will replicate. They will remind you, day after day, season after season, in the quietest and most ordinary possible way, that growth is still happening. That life, in all its green, unhurried, patient persistence, is still very much present. And so are you. If this conversation has brought you any clarity, any comfort, or any small sense of possibility, then it has done exactly what it was meant to do. There is no complicated action required, no purchase, no overhaul of your living space. Perhaps just this. The next time you walk past a plant at a garden center, or notice a friend's home softened by something green in a window, let yourself pause for a moment. Notice what you feel. That feeling has a name, it has a history, it has a biology, and it has been waiting quietly for you to pay attention.